All right, the murder trial of Constable Forcillo in the Sammy Yatim case continues. We're hearing reports of video footage from the TTC bus the night that Yatim was shot, reveals what happened that night from several angles. Clearly, passengers on the streetcar were concerned for their life. The video shows at 11:56 p.m. that Sammy Yatim thrusts a knife at a woman sitting close by, slashing the blade close to her neck. He stands up, and everyone from the back of the streetcar races towards the front, fleeing Yatim. He is holding a knife in one hand and his penis in the other. To talk more about all of this and what we've learned from it, Gary Dierenfeld is with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com to find out more, and he's with us now. Good afternoon, Gary. How are you today?
Good. Great to be with you again, Scott.
Thank you for taking the time to join us. Can a situation like this, and of course it's easy to sit here and play Monday morning quarterback afterwards, but can situations like this be de-escalated with the right training?
So let me speak to that. A little-known fact about myself, going back to the early 1980s, I used to work in group homes with youths who had a propensity for very serious violence. So I was trained in a number of different things: conflict management, physical intervention, so how to really take somebody down and hold them down who is a danger to themselves and others. And, one of the first things we learn in physical, and I also was a trainer of this, so one of the first things we seek to train people on is when the hell to step away. We really do want to de-escalate conflict. We want to minimize the risk of harm to self or the person who is posing the threat. To that end, sometimes giving space and simply waiting is the best intervention. We really don't need to move in on a person, let alone use deadly force, unless there really is a serious and immediate threat.
Will the videos that are inside the streetcar display that? Will they show either way, whether there was or wasn't a threat?
So let's differentiate between what you and I saw on those videos and what the police would have seen coming onto the scene. So you and I, by looking at those videos, we now know that this guy, that Mr. Yatim, I should speak respectfully because we know nothing too much about him and we shouldn't disparage him. But having said that, he had seriously threatened, intimidated a young woman at the back of the bus by gesturing across her neck with a knife, and at or near the same time, he exposed himself physically. So this is both a physical and a sexual assault in progress by definition. Mm-hmm. People catch wind of this very quickly. They flee the bus. You and I know that. What the police don't know, they don't have any of that. They haven't had a chance to watch the video. They happen on the scene, and part of what they're going to see is a TTC driver who's remarkably composed and goes in on and off the bus, and finally when the police are near enough, then he seems to exit the bus hastily. It might have been described to police that there's a guy on that bus who exposed himself and is threatening with a knife. But in terms of what we see on the video and the police experience of Mr. Yatim, it doesn't appear that he poses an immediate threat. When we understand that Officer, I'm sorry, his name escapes me,
Forcillo, yeah.
Forcillo, thank you. He fires 3 shots, all of which wound Mr. Yatim, and he falls to the ground. He's not dead, but he's certainly writhing, and he may still be somewhat intimidating, but he's quite incapacitated. Thereafter, he's shot another 5 or 6 times. Thereafter, he's tasered. Rolling rolling back the tape, we look at this situation, and, I'm not there clearly, but I think to the average onlooker, such as myself, we say, was this a necessary shooting? And it's difficult to conclude that it was. There's been a lot of calls for police services to train themselves in nonviolent intervention when being confronted with persons who may be at risk of harming self or another. So not to blame the police, because I don't know what training that they have had, but it really does speak to the need for that kind of training. To know when not to intervene is sometimes more important than knowing when to intervene.
Can we arrive into a scenario, into a situation like this, and in a few brief moments determine whether this person is suffering from a mental illness or not?
Well, that you may not know in the immediacy of the situation. All you know is that we have someone there brandishing a knife who, although looking scared or intimidatingly or gesturing violently, there is enough space between he and the police that he's still not an immediate threat. That we do know. So in a circumstance such as that, again, we have to know when not to intervene. And yes, emotions run high, adrenaline runs high. And quite frankly, I've been in the situation of having to talk down a youth who's holding a shard of glass, threatening harm to me. I understand the anxiety that's involved in those situations. The training is to help us remain composed, to remain vigilant and mindful of what is going on about us, to manage that adrenaline rush so that we don't inadvertently escalate the situation by our management of it. That is something that we need to know that police are trained to do if they aren't yet trained sufficiently.
It appears anyway that since this happened and other situations similar to it, that policy is starting to change, that we are starting to look more on the side of someone who may not be, who may have a mental health issue. I know Hamilton Police is working together with people when there's a situation like this.
We have the Coast team here in Hamilton.
Yeah.
Where in view of a crisis, you phone the Coast crisis number, and a mental health worker, I believe along with a police member, but I could stand corrected, but it is a mental health person who will attend to the visit to help assess and figure out how to manage the crisis, rather than turning it into a police matter instantly. Yeah.
Does this matter? Does it matter at this point? Is it a relevant point whether your team had mental health issues or not, or is it just about de-escalating confrontation?
From my perspective, it doesn't matter if he had a mental health issue. What matters was there a threat in the moment, and if so, how could it have been managed in such a way that it didn't require his death, shooting him? And as we look at the tape, and again, I'm not out to slam the police whatsoever. We're looking at a period of time in 2013 where the thinking and the training was different.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have to learn from that. But in this day, several years after the fact, with the benefit of learning from these kinds of things, we know that there's other and better ways to handle it.
If a person has a mental illness, should it be addressed differently? I mean, is there any indication how do you decipher, even if you do have the training, how do you decipher at that moment, I'm not dealing with a typical criminal here, I'm dealing with somebody who's got a mental illness?
Right. Well, quite frankly, there are a number of questions that a trained professional will ask, and there's a number of behavioral observations we will make to help determine the mental capacity of the person in the moment. We can ask them questions that may draw out, do you know where you are, what you're doing, and who you're in the company of? Do you know what day it is? Do you know what's going on? Why are you doing what you're doing? And it's one thing if a person answers, somebody really made me angry and I'm acting out my anger, and, they'd use other colorful, more language perhaps, versus God told me to do this.
Yeah.
Okay? So we can do very, if you will, on-the-fly assessments that may feed into how we're going to chat with this person, the kind of time that we want to take, and maybe even the additional resources we want to bring to the situation. Now, can you imagine this young fellow, this teenager, apparently had asked the TTC driver that he wanted to speak to his father. Can you imagine if the TTC driver, if exiting the vehicle, had closed the doors of the vehicle? Essentially, you've got the situation contained.
Mm-hmm.
We can get this boy's dad to the scene.
Yeah.
How different would that have been? What kind of outcome would that have produced? This is how we have to think differently. We have to think, gee whiz, I value this person's life. How am I going to help this person de-escalate in the moment to provide as good an outcome as possible? When the adrenaline is rushing, sometimes we think that we have to secure the environment really, really fast in order to feel safe. That's a false way of thinking. Time is often on our side.
What have we learned from this incident?
Gee whiz, I'm hoping we've learned a lot, quite frankly, and that is to help our police services understand better the nature of mental health issues, and even absent mental health issues, how to help our police services appreciate that intervention needn't be as quick and spontaneous as we see in that video, that we can take time, that as long as no one is truly being put in harm's way, we can step back, assess, evaluate, and plan a more strategic intervention.
Are we expecting too much from police, Gary?
You know what? Child care workers, child and youth workers, we do this every day. People don't know that. The general public doesn't know that. Those who work in child and youth detention centers, as I have, we do this every day. We're used to de-escalating. We're used to looking for benign ways to intervene, and even when we have to physically intervene, benign ways to physically intervene to reduce the risk of even a physical injury. So the way of thinking and the training is already available.
Without this proper training, is this officer guilty?
And you know what? That's for the jury to determine, isn't it? So I don't know. So often we have to look at things in the context of the day that it occurred, not in the context of the present. And we're going to have to learn what that officer's personal disposition was. Was there other issues in his own service record that would suggest impulsivity in matters such as this? What was his training? There's a lot to be answered to help us better appreciate his decisions and the outcome on that day.
Are you confident that we're learning from this? Are you confident that we're moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I really am, actually. Not necessarily fast enough for me and for those who advocate on behalf of persons with mental health issues. So while we may not be moving fast enough, at least, thank goodness, we're moving in the right direction. I think Hamilton happens to be a leader in this. And I could be corrected if I'm wrong, but I believe that our COAST program, Hamilton's COAST program, is a model for others to emulate.
It'll be interesting once this is all settled, how many of these questions have already been answered.
Yep. There are I pointed out to a few the serious questions to answer, and hopefully at the end of this, people will be satisfied somewhat with the outcome. It comes at a dear, dear price. An 18-year-old boy is dead. That's a terrible outcome. So we had better learn something very, very special. Not that it will ever compensate for the life of this boy, but we want something good to come of it.
Gary Dierenfeld has been with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com, to find out more, talking about the case of Sammy Yatim. It, of course, before the courts right now. Gary, thanks very much for the time and insight, as always. Much appreciated.
Great to be with you, Scott.
Thank you.